This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by L3 Harris, a leading supplier of mission-critical communication systems and equipment for local, state, and federal firefighter agencies. Learn more at l3harris.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzo. I'll be your host. I am a writer here at Fire Rescue One. I'm not alone though today. I have the commander, the editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue One, Janelle Fasquette. Janelle, good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's good to be here. I haven't been on for a little while.
This is a large-scale podcast. This is a big one.
Oh, yes, true.
Because of the magnitude of the discussion, and also just the person that is our guest. He's got a very large personality, very large brain, lots of knowledge, and he also uses that to really to manifest into major event planning. And that's what we're going to talk about today: is how in the world do you even begin to manage an event like the Super Bowl or festivals or concerts, or we have FIFA coming to the U.S. And this is all part of our Fire Rescue One special series called On the Front Line, Fire Service Readiness for Large-Scale Events. It's sponsored by L3 Harris. Thank you very much for them for sponsoring that. They also sponsor today's podcast. But without further ado, it's really good to see you. How are you, Bryan? How are things? Welcome to the program again.
Thanks, man. No, good. Great to see you. As always, it's a pleasure to be with both of you. Like you said, I've enjoyed our friendship for such a long time, and I think what you're doing in this show gets a lot of great information out to firefighters and to the public safety professionals that we work with. So for me, it's a privilege to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Well, 2026 is a big year for festivals. Fire departments, we're all across the U.S. We're facing these operational challenges. They're during these high visibility events. We have the 250th anniversary of the nation's founding. We have the Super Bowl we mentioned, FIFA World Cup. This front line, it's a special editorial series kind of dealing with the different aspects of that, mainly incident command and how we can prepare incident commanders. And I also think frontline needs to understand too what all goes into this. So if you're tasked with, looking at a particular area for an event, exit strategies, all these different things, I think they all make for great conversations for crews, just to break down at the table, and then to actually then go out in their territories or these areas and talk about it. I even like looking at, large scale event and then talking to my crew. Okay, we got this at this event. What do we even think about doing? And so, with that, your expertise lies in a lot of event planning, because you're currently a director of health and safety for Red Rock Entertainment, and you oversee the fire EMS for these major events. And you also previously served as the fire chief for Pasadena Fire Department, and former CEO of the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. And so you've actually got a vast knowledge of this, and you're still using it. And talking behind the scenes, you got a lot of stuff that you're planning this year. But I think the first question, first thing that comes to my mind is like, holy cow, this event is coming. Where do you even begin?
Yeah, it's exciting and terrorizing at the same time.
Yeah.
We kind of laugh because, when I first came in the job in the fire service, we had a very clear picture of what our responsibilities were. And we kind of laugh about this as we evolve in the fire services, when nobody else knows how to figure it out. Oh, just give it to the fire department. They'll figure it out. And this is almost no different. This event planning phase, or the event planning process, is really almost a new specialty that the fire service has taken on, because really it applies all of the codes that are relevant to events to these activities. And we're supposed to be the experts at understanding how those applications make sense to the person who's bringing that event to your city, to your venue, to your arena, whatever it is. And so for me, the first thing is just to kind of get a good idea of what is the event? What's the size of the scope of the event? Is it music? What kind of music? What crowd are we going to expect? Where is this going to be held at? What does the venue look like? What are some of its limitations, its vulnerabilities, its challenges? Where I come from in Pasadena, we had the Rose Bowl, iconic stadium. Absolutely one of the best venues in the nation for both football and for concerts and events. but it has limitations. It was built, 100 years ago. So the exiting is not going to be the same type of exiting that we have in modern buildings. So a lot of consideration has to be taken upon the fire department to say, hey, because we have these limitations, what mitigative measures are we going to put in place to ensure that everybody that comes to that show is being thought about and it's being safe for them to come and enjoy it. Nobody buys tickets to shows to get hurt, to get injured, or to get killed. My job is to make sure that they don't have any of those things happen to them. And part of that is a pretty robust and intrusive planning process that covers a lot of dimensions, not just fire, it's not just EMS, it's safety, it's security, it's access control, it's perimeter control, it's site design, it's crowd management, all the way down to where do we put the barricades near the stages so we don't get people crushed and smashed. And if we have to get them out of there fast, where do they go? How do we design the perimeter fencing so it's conducive to good crowd flow? How do we staff it so we have adequate responders available to deal with any kind of emergency that should arise during the event? How do we deal with the artists? How do we get them in and out of the venue? All those things, and that's just a thumbnail of the considerations that we have when we're just doing the initial planning part of these large events. But what I will say is, it's not something that the fire department or any other public safety agency can just ignore and give to the promoter or whoever's bringing the event. The mistake is not addressing and demanding things from the promoters and from the event coordinators that are bringing these concerts, these festivals, these whatever venue activities are to your city. You should be demanding things from them to ensure that the public safety presence and the public safety response is both adequate and appropriate.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to that about how you make such demands, right? What that looks like in the communication and the partnership. But before we even get there, do you have a simple formula from day one? Okay, we know we're expecting X number of people. So for every X number of people, we need X number of responders on scene. And then just
resources.
Start there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, the first thing I'm looking at is the obviously the capacity of the venue, the type of event. Having a Barry Manilow concert is going to be a bit of a different staffing model than a Metallica concert. And so I'm going to be looking at what I would expect in crowds. I'm going to be looking to see, is this going to be crowds that arrive early because there's pre-show festivities? Are they going to want to get there quick because it's standing room only? There's no assigned seating. So the sooner they get in, the better position they have at the front of the stage.
Where do they park their scooters, and where can they plug their scooters in at Barry Manilow, right? Like, you got to watch for that.
Right. How many, do we have a tennis ball on the walker replacement program? So, stuff like that, really it's the three questions I'm asking is the venue, the crowd, and the event. Those are the three things I'm going to start asking just to kind of get an idea of what the size and the complexity of the event's going to be and start making some staffing decisions based on those answers.
Who needs to be at the table then? Does that help determine next step? Who needs to be at the table for these discussions?
Yeah, that's a really important topic to really hit on, because the mistake is a lot of times the city has an events department that may be under fire prevention, it may be under the city manager's office, it may be its whole separate entity in and of itself. And a lot of times these event promoters, you have a venue in your town or a space in your town like a big park or a stadium, and they want to bring an event there. And it sounds really good to everybody else except for the public safety folks or the folks that are going to be handling the approvals and the building and construction, access, transportation, and the actual site design. So at the table should be, at a minimum, your public safety representatives. It should be your city economic development folks, your city planning folks, the fire prevention staff, just to understand, and obviously the venue, all the stakeholders that would be involved in the response, public works, Department of Transportation, anybody from the event side, the promoter, their operations people, their safety and security staff, all getting together to do a review and understanding of what the show looks like, how they intend on running the show, the times of operation, et cetera. So everybody's hearing the same information all at once. And all of those people should be in the same room in the initial kickoff meeting.
And then is your job is to make sure they all understand, because you're talking about there's different terminology then from one group to the next, right? So it's almost like your interpreter at one point, and you got to bring up a lot of point, right? Like when has that gone? I mean, what makes that go well? What makes that not go well?
Yeah, and this is where, I've been incredibly fortunate in my career. I've been able to I have experienced things that nobody else has been able to do. My success in my career and in my afterlife has really been as a result of the people that I've worked with and been surrounded by. I have been able to manage the Tournament of Roses parade. That's the largest parade in the world. 1 million people show up in Pasadena on one day. We've been able to manage huge events, 85,000 people in a Vegas festival grounds. I mean, I've been very fortunate to be part of that. Super Bowls, FIFA World Cup games. Those are all things that I've been very fortunate to have been part of, to understand what all the persnickety things are that are involved in making sure that safety profile is continuously met. So the question that you have is, what does that mean, and how does that translate, to city government? I have the city speak because of my previous 10 years in the fire department and working for a city. I understand what the cities are looking for. The translation comes to the event people, because what we're talking about they may not understand what we mean by that. And a lot of times before I arrive, there's been a lot of conversations and a little bit of conflict because they don't understand what we're talking about as city officials. They don't understand why they have to comply with an assembly occupancy fire code, which they don't. They don't understand the application of the life safety code. They don't understand the city charter and the city provisions for a neighborhood that doesn't allow a certain decibel level to be reached past 10 o'clock. All those things and those intergovernmental relations is where I kind of have been able to fit in to help out and really do that translation so the event goes off successfully and everybody kind of understands their roles, responsibilities, and expectations.
I'm going to get your blood boiling now, because I'm going to ask. Someone listening probably thinks, well, codes should dictate exactly what people need to do for these events and what needs to happen. And we were talking beforehand. You went, codes? What codes? Right? Like, let's talk about that and why that's so important for us as a fire service in general to really start to put our energy towards getting some of those. And where are we at right now with that? Answer that to that naysayer who thinks that codes are going to solve all their issues when they plan these things.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. As it stands right now, there are very few applications of the fire or life safety code that really apply to these large outdoor events. Venues have a little bit of a different scenario because venues are a fixed facility. But when you're building from scratch a festival in a park or in a desert location, there's really no application of the fire code that can even come close to meeting their needs or meeting what that's supposed to govern. So what I think needs to happen, and this is a gap in the industry, is I think there needs to be an industry best practice and standard established for things like capacity. How many people can we fit in this place? How many exits should we have? How many lineal feet of exiting should exist? And how do you calculate that? And there's a whole bunch of stuff to go dive deep into that. How do you manage the crowds? How are you getting people in and around that, and how are they getting into the venue? How are they getting around the venue? And how are they getting out of the venue, both normally or in an emergent situation? How are you managing the command and control? How are you communicating with not only the event staff, but the patrons in case there's something that occurs? How are you notifying people that there's a disaster, an incoming weather system that may impact them, or they need to shelter in place? There's 50 dimensions to this, none of which are addressed in the fire or life safety code. There's a few provisions about crowd managers, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And there's a few provisions about exiting, but they don't really apply to non-structure, or they don't apply to things that you build in the middle of a park. So the UK has a lot of really good industry best practices that we've tried to kind of adopt over here in the US. But the difference between the US and the UK is all these things are highly regulated by the government. Their crowd management is regulated by the government. Their command and control is regulated by the government, EMS, government. And they have strict regulations that apply to what they're supposed to do. Here in the US, we don't have those regulations. We need to start developing some codes that aren't restrictive, because you don't want to get too restrictive, but something that allows our firefighters and our fire prevention professionals and building officials to have at least a benchmark to start and really understand what makes a lot of sense based on some of the past incidents that have occurred worldwide that have gotten people killed.
Yeah. And unfortunately, those things are still happening. We've had, a couple big festivals. There was just a documentary on one that we probably all are very familiar with, that I think we all need to watch just from a learning standpoint in the fire service, right? But you mentioned bringing the UK stuff over. How do we get that into a more concrete code? Like, what's the process of that? And as a fire service, or even as a local firefighter, who do I start talking to, or how do I start to get to push towards those things a little bit more?
Yeah, it's a great question. The unfortunate part of the current situation is the festival industry as a whole is about as archaic as it gets. They are stuck in this 30-year standard. Hey, we've always done it this way. Sound familiar? Why are we going to change it? And there's a lot of parity between the fire service and the festival and event industry, because in the past, most people that are running security for these events and these large festivals are also handling safety, EMS, planning. They're trying to. They're supposed to do that. That carries that's a scope of their work underneath the title of security. Whereas today, there has to be a difference between safety and security. The current theater of terrorism that we live amongst right now globally requires security to be myopically focused on things like counterterrorism, access and perimeter control, just anything that happens within the event, response to nefarious activities. That's a whole separate, it's a whole separate precision that needs to be addressed by an individual who oversees nothing but security. They can't be focused on anything but security. Whereas safety has things like site planning, code compliance, crowd management, command and control, weather monitoring, notifications, emergency notifications. All of those things are part of the safety package that distinguishes much different from what the security people are supposed to be doing. That has to be changed. That's the first step, is changing the mindset of safety and security. Follow that with people like ICC, with the code folks that are really interested in making this a safer place. How do we adapt the code to comply with or allow people to at least get a good start on what is safe? What can we allow so that people don't get hurt or killed when they come to these events?
Who ultimately takes command of an event like this? I know Janelle was just thinking that, weren't you?
Yeah. So in our world, and again, we do things at Red Rock Entertainment, and we're a joint venture with Live Nation. So we do a lot of the Live Nation shows. We have a whole command center that we set up, very similar, almost identical to what we did at the Rose Parade Command Center. It's a multi-agency coordinating center where we have a representative from fire, a decision maker, not just someone who's sitting there on overtime, a decision maker from law enforcement, from fire, from the event, from production, from EMS, from contract security, from parking, from transportation, from social media, from public information, and any other government agency that's a decision maker that's also a stakeholder in that entire event. All of us are sitting in the same room with 38 closed circuit television cameras on screens, watching every single bit of that event, communicating with our own indwelling radio system, making decisions in what we would term as unified command. So we have the event commander, which is me, who is in charge of the 1,000 or 1,200 people that we employ for the event, along with law enforcement and fire commanders. And we operate in a unified command posture so that we're addressing all of the public safety needs and anything that goes wrong at these events. That's effective command and control. That's part of a plan. What comes with that is preparedness in advance. It's training for your staff and validation of their skills and abilities, and making sure everybody is operating in the same common operating picture. That's how it's supposed to be done. Unfortunately, we're the exception, not the rule. That needs to change.
Can you share a little bit of insight into what that communication looks like with the fire IC or representative during an event? What are those comms like? What are the discussions happening? And then, we can also talk about kind of the pre-planning as well, but I'm curious what that's like in the moment.
Yeah, literally, we're face-to-face. It's face-to-face communication. And I'm sitting in the command center in a chair looking at the screens. Right next to me on the left is our law enforcement partner, and on the right is the fire partner. And then in the periphery is the contract security dispatcher, the contract medical dispatcher, the social media and public information officer, and everybody else that's kind of watching and hearing the decisions we're making. And we're essentially in that command center communicating with issues, calls for service that come in, and basically delegating all those responsibilities to the appropriate jurisdiction. Typically, at a large event, you have contract medical that handles the calls within the perimeter, but the fire department certainly is there to be activated in the event we have an MCI or some other big activities happen where we need their help to kind of help manage whatever the incident is within the event. But the conversations are just like we're having this conversation here, face to face, very clear. If an incident comes up, everybody hears it, everybody sees it, everybody knows what's going on 100% of the time. We're not wandering off watching the show. We are all based in that command center 100% of the time.
You had talked before about how safety and security were separate roles. So is the fire department typically running the safety element, or is that just throughout all the agencies have some component of safety?
Yeah, I think all of us are responsible for the safety and security element. I think what's nice is that when you have everybody in there that's a decision maker, depending on which jurisdictional authority is required to respond to an incident, they're literally right there. So if I need the fire department to send an ambulance for something, I look at the fire department decision maker and say, "Hand me an ambulance for this call that's over at gate 5." And then he dispatches his resource. He commands that resource to be sent, and it's done. It's a seamless transition. So all of us are part of the safety and security profile, and we're all participating in that with whatever resources we have underneath our jurisdiction.
Depending upon the event, and this kind of piggybacking on what Janelle was asking too, depending upon the event, there's more emphasis on one particular section than the other, right? So if it's a security event where there might be, obviously a danger or within the crowd control, right? A fight or something like that. PD is you're probably focusing on PD with then, queuing EMS to get ready, right? Like, setting
and
that.
that's exactly right. It's basically the quarterback. And so typically in events, you have contract security that deals with all the stuff that happens with the crowds. We generally try to keep law enforcement outside of that. We like to have law enforcement there to enforce, weapons violations, to be sort of a deterrent at the entry gates, to deal with any kind of, if there's an eviction of some sort, they'll help trespass them for us. But really, it's the contract security staff that handles the ordinary crowd issues, the fights, the drunk guy that's being obnoxious, whatever it is. But when it comes to any criminal activity, that's when we have law enforcement engaged. We try not to engage law enforcement too much in these events unless it's absolutely necessary or if there's a crime that's been committed. Same with the fire department. We'll often use contract medical to handle ordinary medical calls within the perimeter and even sometimes outside of the perimeter, in a certain distance outside the perimeter. But when it comes to managing resources and when we have an incident that gets larger than the capacity that the medical providers and security providers can handle, we have law and fire right there able to help us and mitigate that right away. And it literally is a face-to-face conversation about, hey, this is what's going on. And we're already monitoring anyway because you're in the command center and they already know what we're going to ask for. So they're probably already sending resources. It's an essential and effective way to manage a large event where you have 75,000 people gathered in a very small, confined area.
L3 Harris is a leading supplier of mission-critical communication systems and equipment for local, state, and federal firefighter agencies. We have more than 80 years of experience in public safety and professional communications with over 500 systems now in use around the world. Learn more at l3harris.com. Now let's get back to the show.
Does every department or division have their own channel specific? Like you have EMS on channel, whatever, right? Like, how difficult are those conversations trying to figure that out? Like, where are we going to get everybody's comms? How are we going to get everybody on the same page with comms? Is that obviously over the last 20 or 30 years, it's gotten a little bit easier with the radio, but are we still archaic in that sense a little bit?
No, what's nice about that is that, so the festival will oftentimes have its own radio indwelling communication system they bring in. It's a repeated UHF. It's not trunked or anything encrypted, but we do have our own radio system that we stand up in there. And again, because we've got law enforcement, fire, and government radios in there with their own frequencies using their own radios, it's using the ICS system. It's delegating. If it's a fire call, then the fire guys use their radios and communicate that down. If it's a law enforcement issue, they use their communication system and they filter that down. But the decision makers have our radio system, and they're in our command center listening to the calls that are coming into our festival dispatcher, who receives all the calls and then disseminates them to whatever jurisdiction or whatever agency is responsible for handling it. So for instance, if one of our crews in the field calls for a medical call at stage 1, we hear that, we give that to the medical dispatcher who's sitting right next to our dispatcher. They send their resources. Fire and law enforcement are both hearing that. If it's something that's suspicious or it's a critical call, they're already starting to move their people that direction by communicating with them because they're underneath their own division or group. So we have a law branch, a fire branch, a medical branch, and a contracts and a security branch, more or less.
Okay.
One of those divisions or groups, much like the ICS system we use in the fire department, has its own division of labor and its own responsibilities.
Yeah. Is there an extra difficulty? Because I've worked at, events we work, like we'll have, they might do EMS, but then all of a sudden we need to transport. That's when fire comes into it. And it's right. Then it's okay. You're picking them up at gate 2. We got medic 64 there, so then you have your paramedics meet that staff. Is it more difficult that way, or is it easier that way, as opposed to, like, let's say the fire department is actually doing the EMS within that event?
It depends. So Huntington Beach is a department in California that we do a couple of shows at each year in the beach. And Huntington Beach Fire handles the internal EMS as well as the external, and obviously they're the authority that has jurisdiction. To me, it's a lot easier with them. But then I go to Vegas and we have a company called Community Ambulance, which is the jurisdictional 911 provider, and they handle all of our EMS inside, and they've already got their infrastructure in place. So it's really a lot easier when you have the public safety jurisdiction handling it. The problem is most fire departments, especially with staffing these days, can't accommodate the staffing required to manage and deal with these big events. And the last thing we want to do is inundate hospitals with minor trauma or minor patients. So we'll often even bring in physicians, nurses, and actually have a stand-up emergency room almost that can handle rehydration of those that over-intoxicate themselves, that can do simple sutures, that can do basic medical care and discharge them without having to transport them and inundate an emergency room. That's all that part of that public safety, intergovernmental, and event relationship. Like knowing that ahead of time, a lot of fire departments breathe a lot easier because they know we're not going to be running 16 calls of this stupid event you guys want to bring here. I don't have the bandwidth for that, and it's going to impact the response availability for the city.
Give me an example of something that is a teachable moment you want the rest of the fire service to kind of know and understand when it comes to these events, whether they're responding to them or working at them, that you wish you would have known. And, you're like, God, everybody needs to understand this.
Yeah, I think it's crucial for a fire department to know, especially in today's society, what the event is, what their access routes are, who they're going to report to, how they're going to get their information, and how they're getting out. Because a lot of times, I'll use the Rose Bowl, for example. We have a dedicated public safety route that is not accessible from anyone except public safety. As you know, where the Rose Bowl sits in the Arroyo, there's only one way in and one way out, more or less. And so with a few branch roads, we actually dedicate one specific route to just public safety. So if we have to get an ambulance or two in there and get them out to the hospital, we can do that. Knowing who to talk to. The biggest mistake festivals make and cities and fire departments make when they allow events to happen is they don't know who's in charge. Someone has to be in charge. You referenced Astroworld. You referenced other issues that have occurred where people have died or been seriously injured. Indiana State Fair is another good example. Who's in charge? There was nobody in charge making decisions. And that's why that event command center and having an event commander on behalf of the staff that's in unified command with law and fire is an absolute essential part of any successful management of a large event.
Is it that there's no one in charge, or everyone thinks they're in charge and they're getting conflicting orders?
Both. When we design our command and control structure at our events, it's an incident command system chart that is very clear on who's in charge. And the event commander and the event command is in unified command with myself and law and fire, as I mentioned before. We're the decision makers. So if we have to stop the show because we have a terrorist threat, we have to evacuate the footprint because we have an inbound lightning and thunderstorm coming, those decisions are made by me in conjunction with law and fire, and we cause that actually to happen. That has to be the person who's in charge. I don't want to have to call somebody and bring them back to the command center to make these decisions. Someone has to be in charge, and that person or those persons have to be identified, and they have to be present and available 100% of the time during the event to ensure that we make and take action if something goes wrong.
You got to thank Wisconsin, actually, for you having a job right now. If you remember 1993, the crush at Camp Randall Stadium. I work for Madison Fire Department, and there are some members that talk about that. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of this in place in 1993. And I think a lot of what we're talking about came from that instance. I know that the Big Ten at that point put together a committee to really look at, we need a command presence. We need to have response models and transportation set up and obviously the right stakeholders in the game. And that was way back in 1993. We've progressed. What other events in your mind have really forced change? And we also mentioned that some of these events aren't forcing change. What are we missing here? And, do you have any that are sitting on the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of events that come to mind. The Indiana State Fair, I just mentioned that was just a completely preventable disaster. That's a failure from top to bottom. Astroworld, there's all sorts of different equations and different factors that are involved in that. Preventable. South Korea had a trampoline episode where they had a Halloween party where it was only 5,000 people, but 125 people or so died because the exit was so narrow and they had to get out of there fast that people got trampled and killed. And there's probably 200 other examples across the globe where we've had crowd issues where the approval for the space was not calculated well. It wasn't well thought out. The design of the barricade wasn't designed well. Everybody thinks that you can just have an open space, and let's say you have 1 million square feet and you're going to give them 5 square feet per person, and you're going to have 150,000 people show up at this place and be comfortable. But how do you respond to calls for service when you have a sea of people you can't even get to? So barricade design, just the design of the site, has a significant impact on the safety and well-being of the crowds that are going to come and traverse that footprint. That's an important part. We could talk forever about what we need, but I think the immediate term needs are an industry best practice for approving capacity. If I've got a certain space and I've got a certain number of square feet, how many people can I fit in that space? And a lot of times people forget that even though you may have the space, most people are going to be near the stages where the headliners are playing, which means it's going to be more dense. So you got to put some barricade. You got to put some interstitial barricade so it stops the forward pressure on the people that are standing in the front of the stage. Also, how do EMS and security get into the crowd if there's an emergency? How do you identify them? How do you locate them? How do you get them out? Where do you keep your equipment? So all of those things have to be a consideration and a conversation in any event design and any site plan design. And again, we're neglectful because we don't know what we don't know. And again, for me, it's great because I get calls all the time for, hey, we're doing this event here. It's 150,000 people over 2 days, and Slayer is the headliner. What do you think I need to do? Well, how much time do you have? So, from a business standpoint, it's been great for me. It's become very lucrative, but I still think that we're not yet with the contemporary needs for safety and security for large-scale events in the U.S., hands down.
Chief, you're reminding me of, have you guys seen the movie Seven with Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt? Do you know that movie from the 90s?
Yeah.
So there's a part towards the end where Morgan Freeman says to Brad Pitt about Kevin Spacey's character, if John Doe's head splits open and a UFO should fly out, I want you to have expected it. It's like
great line,
preparing
right? Fire service
for everything, right?
Yeah.
Do you get together with all the agencies involved and just brainstorm all the things that could go wrong?
We do. So a couple things. Our team is essentially all public safety professionals, both active and retired. And what we require, so we have 3 positions that we occupy, 4 actually. We have an event commander. We have an ops section chief, which is essentially a type 1 ops section chief you would see in the standard wildland or USAR FEMA task booking. And we have a safety officer, type 1 safety officer. And then we have a logistics chief. And all of those things we have assembled a task book for. So all of our staff have a task book that aligns with the FEMA task books elements, but also adds to it the event requirements. So things that are event specific, things that you want to make sure that people that are overseeing an event as an event commander are capable of doing. And all of our staff has had to go to 3 events and be mentored and be signed off in their task book to validate their ability to, number 1, act under pressure to make decisions that are appropriate, and that have the requisite training and experience to actually deliver the services of each one of those positions. So we're taking the fire service and the FEMA task booking program and applying it to large scale events.
Oh, and I think this is a great drill for somebody, like me as an officer. I'm going to go back to my crew and I'm going to go, okay, let's think about the different things, right? Because our firefighters are creative. We'll find loopholes to anything and we'll find different ways to do stuff. So, okay, here's an event. What possibly could go wrong? That's what we're going to write on the board. Because, just off the top of my head, you talk about a field. There's a festival just east of Madison where a country star, Luke Bryan, comes and he just takes over a cornfield. And I'm thinking, okay, you get all these pickup trucks. Now you get all these cars in there and you get all different backgrounds. What if one of those cars starts on fire? Last year it was pouring rain, so they had mud. How do you get an engine back there? How do you get your water supply back there? Do you have enough clearance to get your engine back there? And if you let that thing burn, it's going to burn because they park them so close, right? Like right away, I'm going, okay, guys, how are we going to handle this? Who are we going to call? What resources do we need? What's our exit strategy? What's our entrance? What hazards do we have to think about, right? And I think that is a great way, right? It comes back to why do we do the show? It's what can we transfer back to the field for them to think about and grow and become a little bit better. So with that, you've accomplished that goal with me, Chief, as always. So I certainly appreciate that, because now my head's going, God, how would we, And then any parting last words? You've been just an integral member of trying to change, how we combat cancer, how we, you mentioned SCBA use, and now you're still fighting that battle when you look at these large scale events. Looking at fire service in general, we are making progress in some areas. You mentioned that we're archaic in some areas as well. I mean, where would you like to see 5 years from now if we come back on? What's your pipe dream for how we handle these large situations?
It's much like the Cancer Network. I when I became the CEO of the Cancer Network, I told our staff that I hope someday you've never even heard of that you will never have ever heard of the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, because it will be such a norm that we just do these things well that you don't need us anymore. That would be great. Unfortunately, that has not happened. But, I think the same thing here. I would hope that people, when they hear this podcast, they see this podcast, would really take a deep step back and go, what am I not seeing here? And what do I need to know that I don't know? And what risks do I now have as a result of these events coming to my town? And how can I get myself and suffuse myself into the planning process early so I can understand what our roles and responsibilities are going to be? And the second part is start demanding things that are necessary for a safe operation. Have a medical plan, an emergency operations plan, a security plan, a crowd management plan. Those are things you should be demanding from these event providers so that your event's safe. That's the minimum standard by which you should be asking, or what you should be asking for from these folks, to ensure that they're meeting their obligation to bring a safe event to your city.
Thank you, Chief. Always motivating, always very insightful. We really appreciate, just taking your time and all the insights. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks, Chief.
It's good to see you.
It's such a privilege to be here. I'm so grateful for you and what you guys do. I love being part of it. So thanks for having me. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
With that, please email us. If you got questions for Chief, if you got questions for us or suggestions, email us, bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. Watch for more from the FR1 series about major incident planning, including we have a webinar focused on events in the Los Angeles area coming up, like 2028 Olympics, planning for the World Cup. So many different things coming up that I think we all need to pay attention to and start to ask questions about. Hopefully you learned something from the program. Now it's up to you to do something about it and then share it to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for joining us, everybody.